Greek mythology, a collection of myths and legends belonging to the ancient Greeks, serves as a cornerstone of their cultural identity and heritage. These stories, featuring gods, goddesses, heroes, and mythical creatures, were not merely tales of entertainment but were deeply embedded in the fabric of Greek society. The myths provided explanations for natural phenomena, conveyed moral lessons, and offered insights into human nature and the divine. The cultural significance of Greek mythology extends beyond storytelling. It is a lens through which we can understand the values, beliefs, and customs of ancient Greece. The importance of Greek mythology in debating its authenticity is multifaceted. On one hand, these myths are foundational to Western literature, art, and philosophy. They shape cultural narratives and have inspired countless works over the centuries, from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey to modern interpretations in film and literature. On the other hand, questioning their authenticity invites a deeper exploration of how these stories were recorded, adapted, and interpreted. This debate challenges us to consider the line between historical fact and allegorical fiction, offering a unique perspective on how societies construct and perpetuate their historical and cultural narratives. Specific examples that illustrate Greek mythology's cultural significance include the use of mythological themes in ancient art and architecture, such as the Parthenon, which was dedicated to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. Similarly, festivals like the Panathenaea celebrated mythological events and gods, reinforcing their importance in daily life and civic identity. In contemporary times, Greek mythology continues to influence popular culture, as seen in Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, which reimagines ancient myths for a modern audience, highlighting their enduring relevance. Scholars and cultural critics often emphasize the allegorical nature of these myths, arguing that their symbolic meanings offer valuable insights into human psychology and societal structures. However, challenges arise in distinguishing myth from historical fact. Some argue that treating myths as mere allegory diminishes their potential historical truths, while others believe that the lack of concrete evidence undermines their authenticity. The exploration of Greek mythology's authenticity connects to larger discussions on cultural heritage, narrative construction, and historical interpretation. It invites us to scrutinize the ways in which stories shape and are shaped by cultural and historical contexts. This debate not only deepens our understanding of ancient Greek society, but also compels us to reflect on the narratives we choose to believe and propagate in our own cultures. When discussing the authenticity of Greek mythological stories, examining historical sources and archaeological evidence plays a pivotal role. These sources include ancient texts, inscriptions, and artifacts that provide tangible connections to the mythological narratives passed down through history. They serve as a bridge between myth and history, offering insights into how ancient societies perceived these tales and, in some cases, potentially grounding them in reality. The significance of historical sources and archaeological evidence lies in their ability to either support or challenge the historical accuracy of mythological stories. While myths often serve as allegorical tales that convey cultural morals and values, their overlap with archaeological findings can suggest a basis in historical events or locations. For example, the excavation of the Palace of Knossos on Crete, associated with the legend of King Minos and the Minotaur, suggests a possible historical foundation for the myth. Another example is the discovery of the city of Troy, unearthed in modern-day Turkey, which lends some historical credibility to the epic tales of the Trojan War, famously depicted in Homer's Iliad. Supporters of using historical and archaeological evidence argue that these elements provide essential context and can validate aspects of myths as reflections of genuine historical events or societal practices. For instance, analysis of art and pottery depicting mythological scenes offers insights into how these stories permeated everyday life in ancient Greece and were more than just fictional narratives. However, there are challenges and controversies associated with relying too heavily on these sources. Many Greek myths contain supernatural or fantastical elements that defy historical verification. Furthermore, the interpretation of archaeological evidence can be subjective, and findings may be incomplete or open to different scholarly interpretations. Some historians argue that myths should primarily be viewed as cultural artifacts, serving to illuminate contemporary beliefs and values rather than factual recountings of events. This focus on historical sources and archaeological evidence interconnects with broader discussions about the role of myth in ancient cultures. By grounding myths in history, even partially, it influences how they are perceived, either as complete fiction or as embellished versions of historical occurrences. This approach can also impact the perceived credibility of mythological narratives, potentially enriching their value as historical documents that provide unique windows into the past. Understanding this connection helps to explore the broader question: where does myth end and history begin? The concept of mythology versus history, understanding the distinctions, centers on differentiating between mythological narratives and historical accounts. Mythology refers to a collection of traditional stories that express the beliefs, values, and cultural narratives of a people. They often involve supernatural elements or deities and serve to convey moral lessons, cultural norms, or explanations of natural phenomena. History, in contrast, is a chronological record of past events, typically supported by empirical evidence and critical analysis, aiming to provide an accurate account of what has actually transpired. Understanding the distinctions between mythology and history is crucial when debating the authenticity of Greek mythological stories. This distinction helps us recognize that while myths may not be true in the historical sense, they hold cultural and symbolic truth that can be equally significant. For instance, the story of the Trojan War, often considered mythological due to its origins in texts like Homer's Iliad, has historical underpinnings supported by archaeological findings in Troy that suggest a real conflict occurred, thus blurring the lines between myth and history. A real-world application of this distinction can be observed in the field of archaeology, where digs and research are often informed by mythological texts. Heinrich Schliemann's excavation of Hisarlik, believed to be the site of ancient Troy, was driven by his interpretation of Homer's epics, illustrating how mythology can guide historical investigation. Another example is the exploration of the labyrinth myth associated with the ruins of Knossos in Crete, which informs our understanding of the Minoan civilization despite the mythological veneer. The debate invites a diversity of opinions. Some scholars argue myths encapsulate historical truths wrapped in allegory, while others view them purely as fictional narratives with no factual basis. These opposing views highlight the ongoing dialogue between mythological narrative and historical fact. Challenges arise in distinguishing these stories due to the scant evidence for many mythological events and the tendency for ancient writers to blend fact and fiction. Moreover, cultural biases can influence interpretations, with skeptical views possibly dismissing the cultural significance and allegorical truths of myths. The interplay between mythology and history influences the broader discourse on historical authenticity and cultural legacy. In understanding this dynamic, we appreciate the complexity and richness of ancient Greek mythology beyond its empirical accuracy, acknowledging its enduring impact on literature, culture, and our collective imagination. The notion of the oral tradition and the evolution of myths delves into the process by which ancient stories, particularly Greek mythological tales, were passed down through generations before being committed to written form. Oral tradition refers to the cultural practice of conveying narratives, customs, and beliefs through spoken word rather than written documentation. This method was pivotal in ancient societies, where myths served not only as entertainment, but also as a means to impart moral lessons, explain natural phenomena, and cement cultural identity. Understanding the significance of this concept is crucial when debating the authenticity of Greek myths. These stories were fluid, adapting to the cultural and social dynamics of their time and place. As oral narratives transitioned across generations, each storyteller might embellish, reinterpret, or alter the tales to suit contemporary audiences, thus contributing to the dynamic evolution of the myths. This inherent malleability raises questions about the historical accuracy and original content of these stories, adding layers to the debate about their authenticity. One example illustrating the evolution of myths through oral tradition can be seen in the variations of the myth of Hercules. Different regions in ancient Greece had distinct versions of his tales, reflecting local customs and values. Another instance is the story of Achilles, whose character and exploits differ depending on the source and regional influences. Such variations demonstrate the flexibility and local adaptations within the oral tradition, complicating the concept of a singular, authentic myth. Opinions supporting the importance of oral tradition in shaping myths highlight its role in preserving cultural heritage and allowing stories to remain relevant across different eras. Advocates argue that the adaptability demonstrated by these evolving narratives is a strength, reflecting a society that values both continuity and change. However, challenges arise when attempting to trace the original versions of these myths. Skeptics might argue that the lack of a fixed text questions the historical value of such stories, as constant reinterpretation can lead to distortions or loss of original meanings. Ultimately, the oral tradition's influence on myth evolution is integral to understanding Greek mythology's broader context. It underscores the complexity and richness of these tales and their ability to echo the collective consciousness of an ever-changing society. This aspect of storytelling connects to broader debates around myth authenticity by highlighting the intersection of history, culture, and narrative fluidity, thereby offering a nuanced perspective that embraces both continuity and transformation within these legendary tales.